Everyone said I was the woman Lucas had carefully cherished, his first love. But on the night of my 20th birthday, he introduced a woman who bore an uncanny resemblance to me, almost identical. He claimed that his actions the previous night had been a mistake, a result of confusing me with her. I wished them happiness and left for my studies abroad. For 3 years, I stayed overseas, while Lucas spent those years seemingly losing his mind. Friday nights were always reserved for dinner with Lucas. 6 years had passed, yet this habit remained unchanged. That evening was no different. The driver was already waiting outside my school early. After saying goodbye to my roommate, I entered the car without rush. However, Lucas wasn't inside as usual. "Where are we headed?" I asked. Emma's husband, who was driving, glanced at me. "To Lanchong Pavilion. Sir is already waiting in a private room." There was something unfinished in his words, but he chose not to elaborate. I didn't press further. There was no need to put him in an awkward position. Lanchong Pavilion had always been one of my favorite restaurants. Lucas had purchased it 3 years ago. In the past, he would always be at the entrance, waiting for me. The moment I stepped out of the car, he would put away his phone, a soft smile replacing his usual frown. "Why are you dressed so lightly?" Before I could respond, he had already removed his coat and placed it over my shoulders. Wrapped securely in its warmth, not even the wind could reach me. I pulled it closer, and the faint scent of roses drifted into my senses, the same fragrance that woman wore that night. The one who looked just like me. "I don't need it." Shrugging off the coat, I tossed it back into his arms and walked ahead. Lucas followed in silence. The moment I opened the door to the private room, the scent of roses became stronger. Sitting inside was Luna, Lucas's new girlfriend. My hand remained frozen on the doorknob. "Come in," he said, his voice casual. "It's livelier with more people around." I remembered how much he used to hate crowds. People change. Lucas had taught me that long ago, yet I had never truly learned. I had thought tonight would be like all the others, a quiet dinner for just the two of us. Instead, he seemed indifferent, gently nudging me inside before closing the door behind us. Luna stood up, pulling out a chair. "Sophia, are you cold? You don't look well." Her words weren't unkind, yet her tone carried a possessive air, as if she were the hostess of this gathering. Lucas no longer sat beside me as he once did. Before I could process everything, the door opened again. A tall, well-dressed young man stepped inside. Luna smiled brightly. "This is Dylan, my junior. He's the same age as you. I'm sure you two will get along." I glanced at Lucas. He simply smiled, silently endorsing it all. Under Luna's direction, Dylan took the seat next to me. Through their conversation, I learned he came from a respectable family, was excelling in his studies, and had an admirable future ahead. Luna meant well. I should have been grateful for her efforts. But emotions don't work that way. No matter how much I tried to reason with myself, my heart wouldn't listen. "Sophia, you should talk to Dylan," Luna encouraged, her smile unwavering. For a moment, I hesitated. Instinctively, my gaze drifted to Lucas, who was calmly sipping his tea. Of course. If he hadn't approved of this, Luna wouldn't have arranged it. I lowered my head, swallowing the bitterness rising in my throat. I had been wrong. If I hadn't spoken those words that night, perhaps things would have been different. If I had never kissed him, would our relationship have remained unchanged? Would there be no Luna, no Dylan? The night before my 20th birthday, Lucas had fallen ill. It was just a cold, but since he rarely got sick, it hit him hard. I stayed up all night tending to him, just as he had always cared for me. He looked vulnerable in sleep, his long lashes trembling slightly. In that moment, he seemed more human, less distant. "Lucas." It had been a long time since I had called him brother. He didn't correct me. He merely let out a soft hum, his eyelids fluttering briefly before closing again. I lay beside him, waiting until his breathing steadied before I found the courage to whisper, "Lucas, marry me. I'll love you forever." I knew I shouldn't have said it. He had never seen me that way. But I had buried this feeling for too long. I reached out, brushing my fingers against the corner of his lips. And then, as if possessed, I pressed my lips to his. His lips were soft, warm. The mere contact sent my heart racing, overwhelming me with an indescribable sweetness. Just as I was about to pull away, a strong hand gripped my waist. Before I could react, Lucas's eyes opened. In the next instant, he flipped me onto the bed. His kiss was fierce, intense, almost desperate. I wanted to escape, but his arm caged me, his body pressed close. Gradually he pulled back, cupping my face in his hands, his gaze burning yet restrained. "You love me too, don't you?" But he didn't wait for an answer. Suddenly he pushed away, walking straight into the bathroom. The sound of running water filled the silence, but he didn't come out for a long time. "You should go to sleep," he finally muttered. His eyes reddened, his expression unreadable. I fled to my room without another word. By the time I woke up, he was already gone. That evening, at my birthday celebration, he arrived with Luna. And in front of everyone, he introduced her as his girlfriend. It was the first time he had publicly acknowledged a relationship. For a moment, everyone forgot who the celebration was actually for. Luna, the woman who bore my face, became the center of attention. Lucas stood beside her, effortlessly deflecting teasing remarks, ensuring she never felt uncomfortable. I could only watch. Once, he would sit with me at night, laptop in hand, talking about his dreams. "Sophia, when I have enough money, I'll send you abroad. You should see the world." I had never cared for such ambitions. All I had ever wanted was to stay by his side. But fate had other plans. The more you fear something, the more life forces you to face it. At 14, my father decided to remarry. He wanted me to meet his fiancée. But I had fallen ill that day, so only my brother accompanied him. On their way back, the car crashed. No one survived. And just like that, my world shattered. I called my mom, and the first thing she asked was, "Is Aiden gone?" Tears streamed down my face as I choked out a yes. Fear gripped me, and I begged her to come for me. There was a brief silence before she ended the call without another word. I sat at the entrance of the funeral home, waiting for her. She never arrived until nightfall. "Are you Sophia?" I lifted my head to see a man crouching before me. His face was clean-cut and handsome, his warm eyes carrying a touch of arrogance. "Aiden's sister?" I nodded blankly. "I'm Lucas," he said, taking off his coat and draping it over my shoulders. "I'm sorry for being late." No matter how much time passed, I could never forget the warmth that coat gave me. He pulled me into an embrace, his hand gently stroking my hair. "You must be terrified." "Yeah." "Lucas, my brother always said you were reliable." At that moment, I allowed myself to cry. He held me without a word, his hand rhythmically patting my back. My sobs eventually turned to exhaustion, and before I knew it, I had fainted. When I awoke, I was in the hospital. The last call my brother made before the accident had been to Lucas. He had ensured I had a place to go before he left. A few days later, I saw my mother again. She held a small child in her arms, hurriedly handling some paperwork before leaving. She didn't even spare a moment to touch my hair or remind me to be good. On paper, she was still my guardian. But in reality, Lucas became my family. From that day on, I lived with him. To outsiders, I was just a distant cousin. But Lucas gave me a warm and stable home. I didn't know when my feelings for him changed. Maybe it was the night he raced back through a storm just to celebrate my birthday. Maybe it was the day he stood firmly by my side when I was wrongly accused. Or maybe it all started when he wrapped his coat around me and knelt before me in the cold. Despite his busy schedule, he always found time to help me with my homework. Sometimes I would go to his office. Other times, he would come home. Even in college, I continued completing assignments with him this way. "Did you finish your work?" We hadn't spoken in 3 days after an argument at Lan Chong Pavilion. Lucas stood before me, picking up my sketches as if nothing had happened. "Don't you have a girlfriend to spend time with?" Instead of answering, he took a comb and gently ran it through my hair. "Being with you is more important." I knew he wasn't telling the truth, but still, his words warmed my heart. I kept accompanying him to his office, even when there was no reason to. I loved watching him work. When his expression was serious, he appeared both intimidating and captivating. "Stay here. I have a meeting to attend." He was busy all morning. When he caught me watching him, he chuckled and said, "Come here." As I stepped closer, he suddenly grabbed my wrist and pulled me between his legs, guiding my hands to his temples. Massage here. I have a headache. I had done this for him many times, usually lulling him into a light sleep. But this time, before he could fully relax, the door swung open. Why didn't you tell me Sophia was here? Zoe. I ran over and hugged her. She had been Aiden's girlfriend and now worked at Lucas's company. Lucas opened his eyes and silently turned on his computer. Zoe placed a stack of documents in my arms, and I stiffened. I didn't have to turn around to feel the sharp gaze behind me. What's this? Lucas's voice held an edge of amusement, but it sent a chill down my spine. He stepped closer. It's for me, I started, but he had already taken the documents from my hands. Information on prestigious universities in the UK? I clenched the hem of my sweater, holding my breath. Zoe, looking confused, spoke up. Yeah, Sophia mentioned wanting to study abroad. It's a great opportunity for her, considering she's studying product design. It would really benefit her future. Aiden, aren't there still meetings this afternoon? She quickly changed the subject. Lucas smiled, cutting her off. Go prepare. Zoe hesitated, then nodded and left. Once we were alone, Lucas's expression turned cold. You're planning to study abroad? Why didn't you tell me? I lowered my gaze, unsure of how to answer. Still upset about that night? I shook my head, taking a deep breath before meeting his eyes. I just want to be more independent. Sophia, you don't need to be independent when I'm here. My brother always said girls should grow their own wings and fangs. Lucas scoffed and, without hesitation, tossed the documents into the trash. I am your wings. I am your fangs. His words made my heart race, but I looked at him with quiet determination. But you'll get married one day. Your wife won't allow this. Lucas's lips curled into a slight smirk as he reached out to ruffle my hair. So that's what's bothering you? Don't worry, Luna isn't like that. I stared at him blankly, my mind swirling with memories spanning the past 6 years. Everything suddenly felt so clear. Isn't it nice to have someone care for you? He asked softly. I averted my gaze to the discarded documents in the trash. My chest tightened as I murmured, Okay, I won't go abroad. Since then, Lucas started coming home earlier. If he couldn't, he made sure I was at his office. In any case, I was always within his sight. Sophia. I turned to find Zoe standing in the break room, watching me with a thoughtful expression. Are you making coffee for Lucas? I nodded. Yeah. She seemed lost in thought before suddenly saying, I'll be leaving soon. I froze. Leaving? Are you quitting? She had worked here for 5 years and had become a manager. Leaving now didn't seem like the best choice. It's not a resignation. Lucas promoted me to branch manager. I let out a quiet breath. So it was just a transfer. Sophia, Aiden cared about you more than anything. Her voice wavered, and as always, her eyes turned red when she spoke about my brother. For his sake, I need to tell you this. Don't follow Lucas blindly. Aiden wouldn't want his beloved sister to become someone who can't think for herself or stand on her own. You're already 20. It's time to start thinking about your future. Do you really want to live like a parasite? When you're ready, reach out to me. I have something for you. Her words etched themselves into my mind. By the time I processed them, she had already disappeared. Carrying the coffee inside, I noticed Luna was in the office as well. There was lingering tension between them, but the moment I entered, Luna flashed a bright smile. Look at you, she teased, playfully nudging Lucas's shoulder. Why are you still making Sophia run errands like this? Lucas didn't reply immediately. Instead, he looked at me and smiled. Did you just see Zoe? My heart skipped a beat. How did he know so fast? Yeah, she was making coffee too. Lucas stood up, walked over, and gently placed the coffee on the table. What did she say to you? Lowering my gaze, I hesitated. She just asked about my studies and mentioned that she's going to be the new branch manager. I see. Without further questioning, he picked up his coffee and returned to his computer. I'll head to school now. Slinging my bag over my shoulder, I quickly left. Stepping outside, I finally exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I had no classes that day but wandered the streets for hours, avoiding the place I once considered my safe haven. It felt foreign now, unwelcoming. Only when Lucas called, urging me to return, did I finally go back. As I walked in, Emma approached. Miss Luna will be staying long-term. Her belongings have already been moved in. I know. What was meant to happen had finally arrived. Yet, I was surprised at my own calmness. Entering my room, I noticed everything had been rearranged. Most glaringly, the small bear I always kept by my bedside was missing. Emma! I called, and she quickly appeared. What's wrong? My little bear. Where is it? She froze. I don't know. I didn't touch it. The brown one? Luna's voice interjected as she stepped inside, taking my hand gently. Seeing her, I felt a flicker of hope. Yes. Have you seen it? She nodded. I thought it was too old, so I threw it away. I bought you a new one. Do you want me to get it? Tears welled up instantly. My entire body went cold. How dare you go into my room? How dare you throw away my things? She paled, glancing at the door. I just wanted to do something nice for you. That bear was a gift from my brother after our mother left. He got it to keep me company. Every time he went to work, it was the only thing that stayed with me. It may have been worn out, but it still belonged on my bedside. How could you not understand that? I grabbed her collar, my voice trembling. You're marrying Lucas. You want to please him? Fine. But you had no right to touch my things. Luna's face flushed as her gaze darted toward the door. Tears welled up in her eyes, waiting for Lucas to step in. Where did you throw it? I demanded. Tell me now. She bit her lip. In the trash can outside. Shoving her aside, I stormed past Lucas, but he suddenly grabbed me. Are you really going to dig through the trash? I struggled, but his grip was too strong. He turned to Emma. Take some people and find it. Let me go. I'll look for it myself. His hold only tightened, pain shooting through my wrist. Digging through the trash isn't something you should be doing. Why not? Do you have any idea what that bear means to me? Lucas's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. Apologize to Luna. What? I blinked in disbelief. With a firm shove, he positioned me beside Luna, irritation flickering across his face. Apologize. She invaded my space and threw away my things, and you want me to say sorry? Lucas, have you lost your mind? His lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes stormy. Then, unexpectedly he chuckled. Luna will be the mistress of this house. She has the right to enter any room. I clenched my fists. I'm sorry. My voice was barely above a whisper. Not just for this moment, but for every mistake that led me here. Exhaustion swept over me. His promises echoed in my mind, words meant to reassure, now meaningless. I should be grateful to Luna. She had opened my eyes. I would never trust Lucas's words again. I found it. Emma burst in, holding the little bear. It's not even dirty. I grabbed it instantly. Clutching it tightly, I vowed never to let it out of my sight again. I'm tired. I want to rest. I turned to Lucas. Is that all right? His gaze softened, his eyelashes flickering. As soon as the door closed behind me, I collapsed onto the floor. The realization sank in. Luna wouldn't have touched my things without Lucas's permission. He knew how much that bear meant to me. Yet, he allowed it to be discarded. Why? A wave of unease washed over me. Was this intentional? Had he orchestrated this to erase the last vestige of my past? He had already sent Zoe away, isolating me. Now, he was trying to sever the final thread connecting me to my brother. Did he want me to rely solely on him? To have no attachments but him? The next morning, before I even opened my eyes, I heard the door push open. Lucas entered, as if this space was his by right. Once, I had found comfort in our closeness. But now, as he stood at my bedside so casually, an unfamiliar discomfort settled deep in my chest. What's the matter? Should I knock next time? He asked, sitting beside me and gently tucking a stray strand of my hair behind my ear. Lucas had an unsettling ability to see through everything. Lying in front of him was nearly impossible. He would catch it in an instant. I'm sorry for what happened yesterday. It was my fault. He smiled, but the warmth never reached his eyes. I've let Luna go. She won't be around anymore. Can you forgive me? I met his gaze and after a pause, blurted out, "Why should someone else pay for your mistakes? Why drag a third person into our problems? That's not fair to her." That day, I had overheard him arguing with Luna. She wanted more of his attention, frustrated that he had publicly claimed their relationship but then left her feeling abandoned. Her words were sincere, her tears genuine. It was a reasonable plea from someone in love. But Lucas, gentle and considerate as he always appeared, never truly cherished anyone. In response to her emotions, he simply said, "I remember. I gave you money." Luna fell silent. I had heard rumors. Her mother's company had gone bankrupt, and their family was under enormous financial strain. Lucas had indeed settled her debts. But he never clarified what she would have to give in return. His hand hesitated in mid-air before he quickly masked his reaction with a soft smile. "You don't like her? Then I'll make sure she's gone from our lives. Is that all right?" On my way home, I clutched the card tightly in my hands. It contained the 400,000 yuan my brother had left for me. After he left, I reached out to a friend preparing to study abroad and asked for details. In the afternoon, I met with Zoe. "Are you really planning to leave?" Zoe placed her coffee down, skeptical. "Yes, I am." The card in my hands still held the money from my brother. Initially, it was only 200,000 yuan, but over the years, Zoe had followed my brother's guidance, making investments that doubled the amount. He had always intended for me to use it to chase my dreams. Even when I was aimless and indifferent to the future, he had silently prepared everything for me. Tears streamed down my face on the way home. If my brother were still alive, he and Zoe might have been married, maybe even had children. I could have spent weekends at their home, helping their child with homework, teaching them how to draw. But reality doesn't allow for what-ifs. My brother was gone, and he was never coming back. I had passed the IELTS exam, but Lucas still had my documents. Lost in thought, I didn't notice Lucas approaching behind me, following my gaze to the courtyard below. That ginkgo tree. We had planted it together. It had withered several times, but each time, Lucas couldn't bear to see my disappointment. He found specialists to revive it. Last year it finally bore fruit. When the golden leaves fell and the fruit scattered across the ground, I had excitedly called Lucas. He dropped everything to return, and together, we soaked the dried ginkgo in water, watching as it turned silver. It was a childish thing, yet he had willingly come back just to do it with me. "Lucas," I said softly. He chuckled. "No need to be so formal." I turned to him, looking directly into his eyes. "Do you love me?" His expression shifted, his emotions quickly concealed. "Of course I do. I raised you after all. I mean romantically," I clarified. "I want to be with you. I want to marry you." Lucas averted his gaze. "What I feel for you is just sibling affection." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Then let me go. I won't be happy here. You wouldn't want me to become a lifeless shell, would you?" His lips parted slightly as if to speak, but then he closed his eyes for a moment. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled. "Is it so painful to be with me?" "Yes." Silence stretched between us. His face paled, his eyes reddened. After a long pause, he exhaled tiredly. "Then go." "Thank you," I whispered and turned to leave. "Sophia," he called after me, his voice unusually soft. "I hope you find happiness. That's all I've ever wanted for you." I didn't turn back. Tears fell onto the back of my hand. I had won. I had forced Lucas to let go in the cruelest way. I should have felt relieved, yet I couldn't stop crying. On the day I left, Lucas didn't come to see me off. I heard he was away on a business trip. Zoe handed me my documents. "Take care. If you ever need anything, call me." "I know, Emma." My throat tightened. "Look after yourself, and don't let Lucas drink too much." "I will. When the holidays come, I'll be waiting for you at home, with Mr. Zoe." I turned away quickly. The word home shattered my composure, and tears flowed freely. I had lied to Lucas. I didn't go to school in the United States. I had long ago chosen a university in the UK. He still didn't know. I had been planning my escape for years. After arriving in the UK, I sent Lucas a message letting him know I was safe and explaining my reasons. I wanted to grow up. I didn't want to live in his shadow forever. He asked for my address, but I didn't give it to him. Shortly after, I changed my phone number and focused on my studies. Adjusting was difficult at first. I stayed with two Chinese sisters, Ruby, the elder, and Mia, who was blind. Their parents had passed away 2 years prior, leaving them to run the household alone. From my window, I could see the River Thames. I loved it, except for the fact that the ceiling leaked when it rained. Ruby worked at a supermarket, while Mia attended a school for the blind. We spent Christmas Eve together. "What's this drink?" Mia asked, holding a bottle. I quickly took it from her hands. "That's not a drink. It's soy sauce." "Oh. Sorry, the label had no braille. I almost made a mistake." I smiled, trying to comfort her, but my gaze lingered on the bottle. The next day, I wandered through the supermarket, realizing that most packaging lacked braille. Only a few had it. How do blind people shop? That night, I finally asked Mia. She patiently explained, "Some things I recognize by habit, but for essentials like sanitary pads, I have to ask the staff. It's inconvenient, and sometimes people get annoyed or frustrated with me." I looked at her as she tried to downplay her frustration with a light-hearted tone. "Mia, what if I design packaging with braille?" She froze, as if processing my words. 10 seconds passed. Just as I was about to change the subject to ease the awkwardness, she suddenly began to sob. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bring up painful memories," she whispered, gripping my hand tightly. "But thank you. Thank you." Seeing her tears brought a sting to my own eyes. I should be the one thanking you. Only now do I truly understand the fragrance of the dreams my brother once spoke of. I also owe you an apology. Throughout my years studying product design, my focus was solely on innovation and capturing consumer interest. I never stopped to consider that packaging could be more than just aesthetics. It could ease someone's burdens and preserve their dignity. When Ruby returned, she found us huddled on the couch, both with our heads down, crying. "Did someone break in? Did you lose something? Did you lose money?" she asked dramatically. Mia and I burst into laughter. With this new perspective, I followed Mia to the school for the blind and even secured a part-time job there, learning braille as I worked. At first, juggling everything felt overwhelming, but I gradually found my rhythm. For 2 years, I lived this way, rarely dwelling on the past, barely thinking of Lucas at all. Fate, however, had other plans. I had no idea how he found me. One evening, after finishing work, I walked out of the school, absently nibbling on a piece of bread. And there he was, waiting. Snowflakes drifted down, settling on his shoulders. He still wore that familiar black coat. I used to joke that his wardrobe was all the same. "The stitching is different," he once teased in return. I stepped closer, still chewing, momentarily forgetting to swallow. Before I could speak, I saw his eyes redden. He reached out and gently took the bread from my hand. "Let me take you for a proper meal." "No need," I said lightly. "I don't waste food." Lucas, playing along, took a few bites himself, though his eyes only grew redder. As he turned away, I caught the glint of a tear slipping down his cheek. He took me to the most upscale restaurant nearby. At first, the waiter eyed my worn attire with skepticism, but the moment he noticed Lucas's absurdly expensive coat, his demeanor shifted to civility. Since I rarely had the chance to indulge in such luxury, I made the most of it, ordering not just for myself but packing food for Ruby and Mia as well. "You should go back to your hotel. I don't have any spare rooms, and I live with all girls," I told him as we walked. Lucas, following closely, looked as though he feared I might disappear at any moment. "I just want to see where you live." I knew the expression he would wear, one of pity. I just hoped Ruby wouldn't be annoyed. Once inside, I used the takeout as an excuse to send Ruby and Mia out for dinner, then led Lucas upstairs. "This is my room. Look at how beautiful the River Thames is on a snowy day." Just as I spoke, a drop of melted snow dripped from the ceiling onto Lucas's shoulder. Hurriedly, I grabbed a tissue to wipe it away. "That was just bad timing. It's usually quite nice," I added quickly. He regarded me in silence, his expression unreadable. We sat quietly for a long while. Only when I urged him to return to his hotel did he finally leave. That night, I came down with a fever that wouldn't subside. Ruby left medicine by my bedside before heading to work. Mia, on her way to school, placed a bowl of soup on my desk. By noon, the door creaked open again, and a familiar scent filled the air. Tears welled up in my eyes. "My head hurts," I murmured. "We're going to the hospital," he said firmly. "It won't hurt for long." He bent down, lifting me along with my blanket. On the way there, he kept checking my forehead, worry etched on his face. I was admitted to the hospital, and he refused to leave my side. Every time I opened my eyes, I saw his exhausted face. Forgetting where I was, forgetting that I had left him 2 years ago, it all felt like a distant dream. The following night, my fever finally broke. He exhaled in relief, watching me eat before succumbing to exhaustion, slumping over the bedside. I shifted closer, studying his face. He was 30 now, yet his skin was still flawless. That face had always been striking. His rest was short-lived. A phone call roused him. Something urgent had happened at his company. They needed him back immediately. Yet when he ended the call, he said nothing. He simply stayed. "Go back," I told him. "Isn't Grandpa Alexander sick? The company needs you." Lucas's childhood had been marked by tragedy. His mother had taken her own life when he was very young. His grandfather, Alexander, had once been a notorious playboy. When their family's business teetered on the brink of collapse, he married Lucas's grandmother for her wealth. With her dowry, the family flourished. Meanwhile, the Yi family, once prosperous, sank into bankruptcy due to failed investments. Lucas's grandmother lost her parents soon after. Regaining his pride, Alexander turned on his wife, subjecting her to endless humiliation. After giving birth to Lucas, she suffered severe postpartum depression, worsening over time until she was institutionalized. Had it not been for her concern for Lucas, she likely wouldn't have endured until 35 before ending her life. Following her death, Alexander wasted no time marrying his first love, treating her children as his own. Lucas's years abroad were, in reality, exile. Yet, despite it all, he was remarkably capable. Without him, the company would have long fallen into his stepbrother's hands. For the first time, I truly grasped that Lucas had always been alone. Before I entered his life, he had spent every birthday, every holiday, by himself. "Sophia, do you hate me?" he asked suddenly, peeling an apple with careful precision. "No, I don't." His hands stilled, as if he had only now found the courage to meet my gaze.
I sighed and earnestly told him, "Lucas, I could never hate you. You raised me. You gave me the best life, showered me with care and protection. I'm only grateful to you. I could never hate you." His Adam's apple bobbed, and his lips pressed tightly together. "I didn't leave you because I hated you. I just wanted to grow up faster, and I didn't want to make things harder for you." He looked down at his hands. "Lucas, I was too selfish before. You have your own responsibilities, a mission you have to complete. You're constantly under the spotlight. I shouldn't have selfishly demanded that you return my feelings." I sat up and held his hand. "Love isn't everything. You've worked so hard for what you have, you can't just give it up. Don't blame me, just consider me young and naive, alright?" He chuckled and lightly flicked my forehead. "You've really grown up." He gazed at the snow outside the window and spoke slowly. "I was the selfish one, wanting everything. I overestimated myself and underestimated you." At dawn, Lucas had to return home. He dropped me off at my doorstep before leaving. As I watched his car drive away, the weight that had been pressing on my chest finally lifted, and my body felt lighter. I reached into my pocket for my keys and found something else instead. It was small, resting in my palm, a protective amulet that Lucas's mother had gotten for him. He had worn it all these years. As graduation approached, my design work finally showed some progress, and my mentor agreed to adopt my proposal. With his involvement and support, my first complete design concept was accepted by a shampoo company. At the launch event, I specifically invited Mia to attend. She was more than willing to stand up and share her needs with all my peers in the industry. The event was a huge success. Soon, small newspapers started covering it, followed by some media outlets and short video creators who helped spread the word. More companies began inviting me to design for them. Mia, as the inspiration behind my work, started sharing her daily life on social media, helping people gain a deeper understanding of the visually impaired. Naturally, her living conditions and income also improved. This success wasn't about how many products were sold, but about raising more awareness for people with disabilities, their struggles, their dignity, and the services they should rightfully enjoy. I believe this message should reach back to my homeland, a country with one of the largest populations in the world. There are many more vulnerable groups that need attention. Let's start by clearing the tactile paving for the blind. If the voices are loud enough, people from any country will hear. Not long after graduation, I opened my own studio, and some domestic brands reached out to me for design work. I accepted. It was a small company, but many of their employees were disabled. After returning to my country, I didn't go back to the Lucas family. Grandpa Alexander passed away half a year ago. I should have gone back for the funeral, but Lucas called, insisting that I shouldn't return just yet. Zoe also shared the same opinion, so I dismissed the idea of going back. Once I finished my design, my boss took just one glance at it and approved it. Wouldn't you want to reconsider? I asked. She shook her head. To be honest, I'm only leveraging your fame for promotion. This idea needs to be adopted by more companies, so the first step is crucial, she said. She explained that she works with people with disabilities every day, and no one understands their need for this design better than she does. They are strong, but also fragile. The braille on the packaging allows them to shop with dignity, without constantly asking for help, and prevents them from getting hurt by buying the wrong products. That's what really matters, she said with a bashful smile. I hope you won't be mad at me for rushing. How could I be mad? That's exactly what I had in mind, too, I reassured her. She wanted to say more, but my phone rang. It was Emma. The moment I answered, I heard her crying. Sophia, come back quickly. He's been in a car accident, he's barely holding on. When I rushed to the hospital, police officers and traffic officers were gathered outside the operating room. One female officer was supporting Emma, who was nearly fainting from crying. Sophia, you're here? Emma threw herself into my arms. That's when I noticed the bag she was holding. It looked like a gift. The doctor just issued a critical condition notice. What should we do? She sobbed. I tried to hold her up, but the sounds around me seemed to freeze. I could see the police speaking to me from the corner of my eye, but I couldn't hear a word. I never thought someone like Lucas would suddenly collapse, his life hanging by a thread. He always seemed in control, like nothing could defeat him. But I forgot. He's human, a fragile, ordinary person. What do we do? I whispered, unsure who I was asking. The female officer came over and helped me to a seat. Please sit. The best doctors in the city are in there, everything will be okay. But her eyes looked away as she spoke. I clutched the protective amulet he had given me, hanging from my neck. Emma hugged me tightly. He'll be fine. We have to believe that. I looked down at her and nodded stiffly. Yeah, he'll be fine. He's Lucas, there's no way. But my voice got stuck in my throat, swelling in my chest until it hurt. We could only sit and wait as doctors rushed in from out of town and hurried into the operating room. Facing life and death, none of us had any power. It had been 3 years since I last saw him, that time in the UK. Why didn't I go see him when I got back? Hadn't I let go of it already? So why did I stubbornly avoid going home? It wasn't until noon the next day that the light outside the operating room finally went out. I rushed to the doctor, grabbing his hand to ask about the situation, but the words faltered in my mouth. The doctor, understanding our anxiety, gave us a tired but reassuring smile. The surgery was successful, but we still need to observe him for a few more days. I collapsed into the arms of the female officer, gripping her sleeve tightly. He's okay? Lucas is okay? She nodded. Yes, he's okay. Though he wasn't completely out of danger, I could only watch him through the small window at the door. He was breathing weakly with an oxygen tube, traces of blood on his lashes and lips, and his fingers were bruised. The doctor told us that if he had arrived any later, it would have been too late. Every time I recall that, a cold sweat breaks out on my back. Emma came over and patted my back. He knew you were coming back, and he wanted to see you. He even went to the office to get this, but the accident happened on the way. I glanced at the gift box Emma was holding. The pink ribbon was stained with blood. Gently, I opened it. Inside was a pair of high heels. His assistant said these heels had been sitting in the office for 7 years. He suddenly wanted to take them, she said. 7 years ago, I was 18. Before my 18th birthday, he had asked me, do all girls want to receive the most beautiful pair of high heels in the world on their 18th birthday? I nodded excitedly and then foolishly added, if a guy gives a girl high heels on her 18th birthday, it means he really likes her. Before leaving, I had noticed a magazine on his desk, open to a page about high heels. But on my birthday, I received a necklace instead. He personally put it on me and wished me, "Dear sister, may you always be happy." So, he had bought the shoes, but never gave them to me. The day after the surgery, the police came. They had caught the drunk driver who fled the scene, and they wanted to know if there was any personal conflict between this man and Lucas. I looked at the photo. I was sure I'd never seen the man before, but something didn't feel right. The officer said, before the accident, this driver's mother was suddenly transferred to another hospital and received a kidney transplant. We traced several large sums of money that were transferred to his cousin's account around the same time. He showed me his phone. This is the name of the person who transferred the money. His name is Matthew. Matthew? I remembered Lucas's stepmother, Madeline, had a distant nephew named Matthew. Once, when I had accompanied Lucas back to his family home for dinner, I happened to see Matthew asking Madeline for money. Although it was just a brief encounter, I was sure I'd recognize him if I saw him again. "Can I meet Matthew?" I explained the connections to the police. After Grandpa Alexander died, Madeline and her son, Grayson, didn't get a cent. But if Lucas were to die now, it would be a whole different story. He has no wife or children, so everything would be up for grabs again. As soon as I finished explaining, the police received a call saying Matthew was already at the station. I quickly followed them there, and the moment I glanced through the glass, I recognized him. That's Madeline's nephew, Grayson's cousin. The police left to continue their investigation, and within 2 days, they found out that the money Matthew gave the driver came from Grayson. He had realized that Matthew was caught and was already preparing to flee the country, but the police arrested him at the airport. For the next few days, I split my time between the hospital and helping with the police investigation. Lucas remained unconscious, lying there unaware. Each time I visited the ward, I couldn't bear to look at him. He was growing thinner and more fragile by the day. If it weren't for the faint sound of his breathing, I would have thought he was already gone. Emma and I sat by his side every day, chatting to him softly. Sometimes, his fingers would twitch, as if he was trying to signal that he could hear us. One day, Emma suddenly tapped my shoulder, and following her gaze, I saw Madeline standing at the door, holding a bouquet of carnations. "Sophia, I came to see Lucas. He doesn't need you to visit." I walked over and shoved her out of the room, closing the door behind me. "Sophia, is this really necessary? After all, we're still family." Madeline started to cry, just as she always did. Lucas had suffered so many times because of her tears. The scar on his forehead, still visible, was from when his father hit him with an ashtray, all because of Madeline's crocodile tears. "If you're here to put on a crying show, I suggest you go to the police station and visit Grayson. After all, seeing him will be difficult in the future." She stopped crying, her face turning pale. Just as I was about to walk away, she suddenly dropped to her knees with a thud. People passing by in the hallway started to look our way. "Sophia, I know Grayson went too far this time. I'll make sure to discipline him. I'll have him apologize to Lucas, even get on his knees if necessary. But he's only 30 years old, and his child will start school next year. You've met him before. For the sake of the child, please spare him." Madeline pleaded, pulling out strands of white hair she had hidden. "Look at me, I'm already 60. Can you really bear to see me bury my own son? And even if Grayson goes to jail, what good does that do Lucas? All of the family assets belong to him. We haven't taken a penny. Isn't that enough?" I almost laughed. "The family assets are Lucas's grandmother's dowry. What does that have to do with you?" "Of course, it's Lucas's." Through the glass, I caught a glimpse of Lucas's pale face, and a sharp pain surged through my nose. Madeline grabbed my hand. Yes, I'm shameless. I'll apologize to Lucas. I'll do anything, but please, help us plead for leniency. Lucas will listen to you. Beg him not to." I shook off her hand. When Grayson tried to kill Lucas, did he ever think about showing mercy? Lucas isn't as lucky as Grayson. His mother was forced to an early grave by you people, and no one ever begged for his life. That's why he's lying in there, unconscious. Please. Madeline's tears flowed even more. "And as for you," I interrupted her. "Grayson ended up this way because of you. You taught him to take whatever he wanted, and if he couldn't get it, to steal it. Congratulations. You've raised a murderer. Remember, if he ever takes a bullet, it'll be the gun you handed him." Madeline's lips turned even whiter, and she collapsed on the floor, sobbing. I paid her no further attention and walked back into the ward. It was only at that moment that I truly understood the loneliness and helplessness Lucas had endured all these years. I rushed to his bedside, kneeling beside him as tears flooded my eyes. I buried my face in his palm. Whenever I cried in the past, he would always comfort me and gently wipe away my tears. I had lost count of how many times he had stood silently behind me when I was lonely. How he had done everything in his power to protect and heal me when I was hurt. But now, when he needed help, there was nothing I could do. Suddenly, Lucas's cold, stiff hand moved, struggling to brush my face and wipe away my tears. "Why are you crying?" His voice was hoarse, his eyes bloodshot as he barely managed to open them and look at me. My mind buzzed, my body froze, and I even forgot to breathe. Lucas's face seemed even paler. When I didn't respond, he opened his mouth with difficulty again. "Who bullied you?" "Doctor. Doctor." Emma screamed as she ran out. I wanted to answer him, but every word and tear was stuck in my throat. I could only gently hold his hand, unable to say anything. The doctor came in to check him over and smiled. "His condition has finally stabilized." Emma and I helped him move his arms and legs. He was groggy, as if he had already forgotten that he had been in an accident. It wasn't until the evening that he was fully awake. "Were you scared?" he asked. I told him everything that had happened, how Grayson had been arrested and how the police were still investigating. Grayson, the fool, thought his plan was flawless but left gaps everywhere. He had been smugly waiting to take everything for himself, but in the end, he just dug his own grave. Lucas nodded. "I've dragged you into all this mess. You shouldn't get involved any further." I didn't say anything as I put away his medicine. "I'm heading back to the studio." He looked surprised, taking the medicine from my hand. "Did I upset you?" I shook my head, grabbed my bag, and prepared to leave. Lucas kept watching me, then weakly asked, "When will you come back to see me?" "We'll see, I'll come after I finish everything." "Oh." When I reached the door, he called out hurriedly. "Text me when you get there. Patients shouldn't be looking at their phones." With that, I closed the door and left. It was 2 days later when I went back to see him. After wrapping up my work at the studio, I overheard my colleagues from the south exclaiming. Only then did I realize it was snowing. I checked my phone, and Lucas had sent a message a few hours earlier. "Sophia, look outside, it's snowing, the first snow." I learned the term first snow from watching Korean dramas and later mentioned it to Lucas. I thought he'd scoff at my childishness, but ever since, he's made sure to be with me for the first snow every year. Even if he couldn't make it, he'd video call. He sent more messages. "The snow is heavy, take care on your way to work, don't slip." The snow from my hospital window looks beautiful. There was even a picture of the snow-covered scenery, with an ambulance parked beneath it. I couldn't see what was so beautiful about it. When I didn't reply, he sent another message a few minutes later. "Isn't it?" I couldn't imagine what Lucas's expression was like when he sent those messages. "Sophia, we're planning to go eat hot pot. Wanna join?" someone asked. I glanced at the messages on my phone. "No, thanks." By the time I made it to the hospital, it was late. When I opened the door to the ward, Lucas immediately turned to look at me, with an expectant gaze I had never seen before. You came?" I waved my phone. "Didn't you say the snow looked great?" "I came to check it out." He chuckled softly, his eyes never leaving me, like a dog who hadn't seen its owner for a long time. "Sophia, did I upset you that day? Please tell me, and I'll change." I put down the things I was holding and sat in front of him. "I don't like how you keep me out of your world, or how you treat me like I'm some fragile little thing that can't handle anything." He was silent for a long time, deep in thought. After a while, I heard him say softly, "I'm sorry. I'm used to protecting everything and everyone I hold dear. I didn't think about how that would make you feel. I promise I'll change." His earnest apology and promise took me by surprise. But since the mood was already set, I replied coldly, "Don't do it again." He perked up immediately and vowed, "I won't. Trust me." I tried to hide my smile as I opened the fried chicken and beer. He couldn't eat any, so he just stared at it longingly. "Don't worry, I'm not that cruel. I got you something too," I said, placing a bowl of porridge in front of him. "Cheers." Reluctantly, he picked up the porridge, clinking it against my beer, and started eating with a look of despair. For the next few days, I visited him almost daily. But this time, the police arrived before I did, likely to ask Lucas whether he wanted to settle things privately or go the legal route. Madeline had come along, begging Lucas to issue a letter of forgiveness. Otherwise, Grayson would face over 20 years in prison for his crime of hiring someone to commit murder. Lucas wasn't a saint, and neither was I. He insisted on following the law, and I fully supported him. After everyone left, Lucas suddenly said, "I've never forgiven Madeline." I didn't respond. Lucas rarely talked about the grudges between them, and I only knew a little. The first time I remember my mother was when I was 5 years old. Madeline took me to the mental hospital to see her. My mother was out of her mind, tied to a chair, being fed. When she saw me, she seemed to recognize me and called out my name. He clenched the blanket, trying to keep his emotions in check. I'll never forget that feeling, my own mother, treated like an animal with no dignity. But I knew she wasn't. She recognized me at a glance. That look, the way she called my name so desperately, it cuts me to pieces every time I think about it. Lucas's voice trembled as he continued. Madeline left me outside and went in to talk to her. I don't know what she said, but after that, my mother became even more manic, hitting and biting people. So, they extended her stay in the hospital. When I was 8, my mother was brought home. That night, she held me as I slept, and her embrace was so warm. I thought I finally had a mother's protection and love, just like Grayson. But the next day, she jumped to her death. His head dropped, tears falling onto the white sheets. This time, he didn't hide his tears from me, exposing his most vulnerable side. My father and I both knew it was Madeline who drove her to it. But when the police came, my father covered for Madeline. He even claimed that my mother had been caught in an affair and killed herself out of shame. I'd heard from Emma that, when Lucas's father was on his deathbed, he asked if Lucas hated him. Lucas hadn't hesitated to nod and say yes. This hatred had driven Lucas for years, forcing him to walk on a razor's edge, with no room for mistakes. He knew there was no retreat if he ever fell, there'd be nothing left of him but scraps. On New Year's Eve, I gave the office team the day off. Then, I went alone to the mountain across from our building. Lucas's good luck charm had been blessed at the temple there, a gift from his grandmother after he was born. It had been snowing for days, and the temple was nearly empty. When I arrived, I mentioned my name. A young monk looked at me intently and asked, "Do you know Mr. Lucas?" I nodded. "Yes, I do." He smiled. "That makes sense. Mr. Lucas has been lighting a prayer lamp here for you for 11 years. He led me inside and pointed to the biggest, brightest lamp in the center, saying, "That one is the lamp Mr. Lucas lit for you." Below the lamp hung 11 blessing tags, each carefully inscribed with, "Sophia, peace and joy." By the time I came down the mountain, it was already afternoon. As soon as I got back to the city, Lucas called. "Sophia, are you coming by today?" I asked him, "Is something up?" He stammered on the other end. No, nothing really, actually, yeah, nothing." I smirked. "If there's nothing, I'm hanging up." "Huh? Oh, okay, you can hang up then." Why had Lucas suddenly become a little clingy? I put my phone away and headed upstairs. As soon as I opened the door, Lucas looked at me with burning eyes. Didn't you say you weren't coming?" I looked at him, confused. "When did I say that?" He chuckled sheepishly. "Guess you didn't. It was New Year's Eve, and before I left the country, we'd always spent it together." Thinking back, during those 6 years, we had been by each other's side for every important occasion. No one could replace Lucas in my heart. I hadn't let him go. In fact, I was more certain than ever that I liked him. No matter what, I liked Lucas. I handed him the gift. "Happy New Year, Lucas." He opened a drawer and brought out a box. "Sophia, Happy New Year." Slowly, I untied the ribbon to reveal a pair of high heels inside. They weren't Cinderella's glass slippers, but rather a beautiful pair of sharp, red-soled high heels. My Sophia has grown up. She's no longer the princess who needs me to protect her. He ruffled my hair, his gaze drifting to the tablet. It was showing a trending video, with a host passionately introducing one of my designs. I looked into his eyes, and at that moment, the way he looked at me was full of admiration, not possession or fear. It wasn't the look of someone staring at a toy they were about to lose control of. "Lucas, let's be together." His lips parted slightly, and his eyes lit up in disbelief as he muttered, "Together?" "Yes, let's be together. No one can take advantage of your situation anymore, and I'm not afraid of those rumors, and neither will you be. Lucas's nose turned red as he cupped my face in his hands. You still want to be with me? You don't blame me? You don't hate me? I've never hated you. I had blamed him for being so cautious, for avoiding me even though he liked me, and for keeping me trapped by his side. But I had never hated him, not for a single moment. Lucas suddenly pulled me into his arms, his face buried in my shoulder. I could feel his body trembling. Sophia, I don't know what to say. I smiled. Then don't say anything, just love me well. I love you. I've always loved you. I placed the protective amulet I had gotten today into his hand. Don't give this to anyone else so easily anymore, okay? I won't. He held the amulet tightly to his chest. I'll never give it to anyone. That night, I went home and finally had the best sleep I'd had in days. When I woke up, I saw dozens of messages from Lucas. Apparently, he had been messaging me in the middle of the night, around 2 or 3 a.m. Sophia, the weather's cleared up. There are stars tonight, did you see? Can't capture them on my phone. Let's go stargazing together on the mountain this summer. Sophia, I think I'm so happy I can't sleep. Lucas really had changed, he'd become almost clingy to a scary degree. A month later, Lucas was discharged from the hospital. He still needed another surgery on his leg. Madeline was arrested. Back in college, Grayson had raped a female classmate. Madeline had paid off the girl's roommate to provide false testimony, which led the victim to commit suicide by jumping into a river. Lucas had someone investigate and uncovered the truth. With solid evidence and Lucas's help, the victim's family was finally able to report it to the police. With undeniable proof of Grayson's hired murder plot, Lucas's lawyer predicted at least 20 years in prison. 6 months later, Lucas had fully recovered. Let's go to England again and visit your 2 roommates, he said. I eyed him suspiciously. Why? He huffed, I need to tell them in person that I'm not Sophia's brother, I'm her boyfriend. I rolled my eyes. They already know. What did they say? What do you mean, what did they say? I pushed his face away and went back to my drawing. They said I've got terrible taste, picking a boyfriend so much older, and they're worried about my future happiness. I stifled a laugh and glanced at Lucas, whose face had grown serious. Early the next morning, I was woken up by rustling sounds. What are you doing? I'm going to work out. What? I glanced at the time. It was barely past 4 a.m. He kissed my forehead. For the sake of your happiness, I've got to start working harder now. Without waiting for my response, he left, already dressed in workout gear. From that day forward, every morning, rain or shine, Lucas stuck to his workout routine. I couldn't help but laugh, though I didn't have the heart to tell him I had made up that whole worry about my future happiness thing just to tease him. Grayson's final sentence came in, 20 years, no more, no less. Madeline got her sentence too, 17 years. No one involved in that case managed to escape, not even the homeroom teacher, who got sentenced to 3 years. Over the years, Grayson had been using the Lucas family's power to act recklessly, and now in prison, he was sharing space with people he had once mistreated. Shortly after Grayson was imprisoned, I heard his left leg was broken. It wasn't until the studio finally secured its place in the industry that I announced my relationship with Lucas. The rumors were plenty, most accusing Lucas of having ulterior motives or calling it a case of an old man chasing after a young woman. I thought about it and, honestly, they weren't entirely wrong. But Lucas was furious, and after some PR efforts, the gossip gradually died down. I sighed. Why do you even care about these things? No one will be talking about it in a few days. Lucas looked at me, aggrieved. They said I'm old. I rolled my eyes and turned to answer the phone. It was Luna. She wanted to meet up, and I agreed. When I arrived, she was already there and had ordered the coffee I used to like years ago. I wasn't sure if you still liked it, so I took a guess. She had become even more beautiful and confident. Since my bone structure had become more defined, we no longer looked as similar as we once did. She had paid off her mother's debts and was now working as a teacher at an elementary school. Seeing you succeed makes me happy for you. I always thought you'd be the good girl who spent her whole life living a peaceful, happy life under Lucas's care. I smiled but didn't reply. Honestly, I was always a little envious of you. Whenever you appeared, Lucas's attention was immediately drawn to you. Even if you were just sitting quietly, his gaze would stay on you. I didn't know how to respond to that, Lucas's ex-girlfriend, someone who had once looked so much like me. Before I could think of what to say, she laughed. But I don't envy you anymore. Back then, I was suffocating under a mountain of debt, desperately looking for someone who could pay it off and love me wholeheartedly. That's why when Lucas asked me to act in his little play, I lost myself. I got greedy and wanted more. She exhaled deeply. At that time, I used to think, if it had been you who owed the money, Lucas would have been worried sick. He would have paid it off the moment you fell into debt. But me? I faced the humiliation of debt collectors, the beatings. I had to face it all alone. You don't know how terrifying it is to be chased by debt collectors at school, with your students sitting in the classroom. So, yeah, I wanted a man like that. She sniffled. But now, it's all fine. He helped pay off my debts, and I went back to teaching. My mom quit gambling and is living a serious life. I don't envy anyone anymore. That's great, I said sincerely, relieved for her. I can see how much you've changed. She touched her face, her gaze softening. Actually, I wanted to meet you today to apologize for throwing away that bear that meant so much to you. I'm sorry. I shook my head. I never truly blamed you. I know that wasn't your intention. Her eyes reddened, and she downed her coffee in one gulp. I've never hurt anyone except for you. This has weighed on me for so long, but hearing you say that today, I feel like I can finally let it go. As we parted, she gave me a big hug. My birthday was approaching, and Lucas had been acting all sneaky lately. I had a good idea of what was going on. Last month, he'd asked me about my plans for marriage, and I had said we could get married next year. Since then, he had been all mysterious, with his friends, colleagues, and assistants all working hard to help him cover things up. On my birthday, he took me up the mountain. I told you I'd bring you to see the stars, and I never kept that promise. As midnight approached, Lucas suddenly tapped my shoulder. A shooting star. It turned out there was a meteor shower tonight, no wonder he chose today to stargaze. I thought it might be never mind. I closed my eyes to make a wish, but I realized I didn't have any dreams left to chase. When I opened my eyes, Lucas was kneeling in front of me, holding a ring. Sophia, I've hesitated for so long in this relationship. I'm so grateful that after all my hesitation and fear, you were still willing to wait for me. Yesterday, I asked myself and reevaluated my feelings, and I found that I love you even more than before. I love the vibrant, glowing version of you today. You've taught me that if you truly love someone, you can't just expect her to be a sheltered flower. If you truly love someone, you should allow her, and help her, to become a towering tree, with her own branches and her own ground to stand on. His voice choked. Sophia, I realized too late, and I caused you so much pain. I'll keep learning how to truly love you. Will you marry me? Even though I had seen it coming, when he looked at me with such sincerity and asked me that question, I still cried. I had thought it would be at some fancy restaurant, with lots of friends and family there, cheering us on and showering us with roses and blessings. But as I looked around, I realized it was just the two of us. It was so quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat. I will. Lucas wiped away a tear from the corner of his eye, his hands trembling as he slipped the ring onto my finger. Sophia, thank you for giving me this chance. He had said those words so many times over the years, as if he was constantly grateful for every moment. A year later, we got married. Zoe came back especially for the wedding. Seeing her, I felt my nose sting with emotion. The day before the wedding, Lucas and I visited my brother's grave. We told him that we were together, that I had found my dream and fulfilled it. I was doing great, and I was happy. I couldn't help but think, if only my brother were still here. He should have been the one walking me down the aisle today. Zoe, visibly nervous, asked me, "Are you sure it's okay for me to do it?" I hugged her arm. "There's no one else I'd rather have walk me down the aisle than you." The moment we stepped onto the flower-covered path, we both burst into tears. In that moment, we were both thinking of the same person. She walked me to Lucas, watching as he put the ring on my finger. "Brother, I'll be happy." Everything Lucas had promised at my brother's grave, he fulfilled.